What I'm going to read today from is my newest novel. It's called The King James Conspiracy. Look how swell it looks. It's like my best cover ever. It's a standalone novel, which means it has no precedent whatsoever in the literary world. And it concerns the translation of the King James Bible. It's set in 1605. And it features a main character whose name is Brother Timon. He's a Catholic monk, and he's sent as a spy from the Vatican to go to England and memorize the entire new work that's being created in England, in Cambridge, and also at Westminster and at Oxford. He can do this because he has a sort of secret weapon. It's a memory wheel that was created by Ramon Lull, who was a Christian mystic, and he can memorize thousands and thousands of pages of dialogue accurately. He also is an assassin, and so if anybody catches him doing this, he's authorized by the Pope to kill them. This guy is based on a real person named Giordano Bruno. He's a Catholic saint, and he invented this memory wheel. It actually worked. He was at first raised up by the Catholic Church as an expert in memory and taught a lot of people the secrets of it, and then it was used against him as proof that he was a witch, and he was burned at the stake by the Catholic Church in 1604. Or was he? That's part of the conspiracy, that he changed his name to Brother Timon, and the plot ensues from there. So I'm going to read you two things today that describe his character. The first is from the beginning of the book, so you see how he begins, and the second is from towards the end of the book, and you see a little bit of what the character's arc is. And also, because this series is interested in the beauty of words, these are sections that talk actually a little bit about that phenomenon. So without further ado, here it is. In an alley off a street in Cambridge, a silver blade caught the moon's light. Then it pierced an old man's heart. The dagger had been skillfully inserted just below the breastbone and thrust upward. The old man, whose name was Jacob, stared into the eyes of his murderer, an impossibly tall obsidian shadow who seemed to reflect darkness. A black robe and a hood made him nearly invisible in the night. "Let me explain what is happening," the murderer whispered calmly. "I have slid my knife past your thin skin and into your beating heart. Now, you could not feel the edge moving, but I have sliced your heart almost in half. The wound in your chest is so clean that very little blood will escape there, but your heart will keep pumping for a moment or two, filling up your chest cavity with enough blood, at least in theory, to make your torso actually explode. Have no fear. You'll be dead by the time this happens, but it will make identifying your body very difficult." The monk's hood fell back, revealing a face that radiated cold brilliance. The eyes were the color of young green leaves. The curled hair was black and gray, tousled wildly about his head. His features seemed carved more than grown. I knew you years ago. Giordano," Jacob managed to say. "Yes," the murderer answered soothingly, "that is why I have killed you. I must no longer be Giordano. I must vanish from all records, and you are a living record of my existence. From now on, I shall be called Timon, you see." Jacob struggled to speak more. "Never fear," Timon interrupted. "You have given God and your masters in the Sidney family a good life of service. Your soul is crouched low now. I can feel it, waiting to leap into heaven. There it will find eternal delight. You were a good man." The alleyway was short, the space of 3 horses. The stones underfoot were ice between 2 grumbling shops in this poorest part of Cambridge. One shop was a butcher's, fouling the air with rank decay. The other a tinsmith's hovel. Cheap pots hung everywhere. Jacob had forgotten where he was. He could feel nothing. He could only smell an overwhelming scent of nutmeg coming from his assailant. "You may wonder why I have chosen this method of execution," the killer continued, his blade still in Jacob's chest. I had a fondness for you, and my studies have indicated that you should feel nothing from this particular kind of wound. Ancient Greek doctors tell us that when a man experiences a sudden shock of this magnitude, his body refuses to believe it, and all his senses are shut for a short span. You will soon sleep, never having felt anything more than the first brief insult of this dagger. I have offered you, Jacob, the only kindness I know how to give in circumstances such as these. Jacob's eyes rolled back in his head. Ah! Timon withdrew his blade. Jacob's corpse slumped toward the stones of the alley floor, just as Timon fancied he could see a burst of white steam fly upward. Goodbye, Jacob, he said to the steam. I shall, alas, not see you again. We shall be spending eternity in separate quarters. So that's the guy that this Brother Timon is at the beginning of the... No. Yeah, that puts a lot of pressure on the second reading. The overwhelming scent of nutmeg comes from the fact that this person is addicted to nutmeg. As it turns out, Shakespeare, among other people, smoked nutmeg. It's a hallucinogenic, it's a terrific, I hear. Hi. You boil the nutmeg, you get an oil, a resin sort of like hash or opium, and you smoke it in a pipe, and you have hallucinations, spectacular hallucinations, and then you're unbelievably sick for about 5 hours. You throw up, you sweat, you're almost dead. So it's a fun day. But apparently a lot of people had this addiction. In fact, a lot of sailors, especially, and this has got to be a small group, a lot of Jewish sailors were addicted to nutmeg in this fashion. They know that Shakespeare at least experimented with it because they found a clay pipe with the nutmeg resin in the shards of some of the remains of his house in Stratford. So, you kids looking for a good time this weekend? And you want to throw up for 5 hours? All right, so the book follows the progression of Brother Timon as he memorizes the novel. He chases a killer. He himself kills a couple of people. He's not a great guy in the beginning of the book, but he achieves a weird transcendence as he's memorizing the King James Bible and discovering secret texts that were available to the translators of the King James Bible. He has a satori, a kind of spiritual awakening, despite himself, and he's transformed by it to some extent. So here's a sample of who he is and what he is toward the end of the novel. Would the Cambridge translators ignore 15 centuries of prevarication in favor of their immediate comfort? Timon hoped not. He was prevented from further introspection of this sort. A sailor, barely able to walk, crashed into him. There was a powdered prostitute on his arm. Her hand was down the sailor's pants. She smelled sweetly of French honeysuckle. The sailor growled an incoherent insult in Timon's direction. He shoved the woman away and steered in the general direction of the Concorde, a ship bound for America. The woman looked at Timon and smiled. The Concorde's boarding, she said. Her dainty voice surprised Timon. He glanced toward the ship. So it is. Are you going away, then? I am, Timon confirmed. Pity, she said softly. Timon smiled at her once. It is a fair morning, he said, with a deliberate abundance of manners. And on another such day I might walk with you along the riverside, if only to see the swans gliding there. But today I am bound away. He reached in his pocket, produced a silver crown, and held it out to her. I would, however, like to leave a good impression. She stared at the coin as if it might bite her. That's 10 weeks' lodging for me. I wish it could be more. He put the coin in her hand. She protested, but then clutched her fist tightly around the coin. "All I ask," Timon said softly, "is that you return the sailor's purse to him before he gets on board. I saw you take it from him as he pushed away from you just now." "Oh," she looked down. "You saw that, did you?" "Yes," Timon assured her, "but that crown I gave you should more than make up for your loss." It does. She looked at Timon up and down. "So you'd be some sort of minister of the gospel then, a priest in some disguise. Is that you?" "It was," Timon whispered. "Johnny!" the girl sang out. The sailor stopped in his tracks. He looked a moment to find the direction from which the voice had come. He turned, doing his best to focus on the girl. She held up his purse. "You dropped this in the street, dear." He patted his pants where his purse ought to have been, eyes popping. He looked around for a moment, then staggered back in the direction of the girl. "Is this what you want?" she whispered harshly to Timon. "I will tell you a secret," Timon said, watching the sailor slowly stumble their way. "A miracle has happened. I have been newly baptized, as surely as if John himself had dropped me in desert waters. Only I have been drowned in words. My old self died in black ink. My new self rose up from letters on a page. The oldest words in my religion have brought me to this newest of dawns. I have been changed by the syllables of the saints. Best of all, I remember every single line. I am, you see, the new and living Bible." The sailor interrupted Timon's soliloquy. Eyes wide, he stood before the girl. "That's my purse." "Here you go, sweet," she said a bit impatiently. "You'll need this in America." She sighed and handed him the purse, patting his cheek. "If ever I return, Nancy," he said fervently, "I swear to make you my bride. You take good care of me every time I'm in London. I see that now. You could have kept this, but you didn't. That's how good you are. So listen, for word of the Concord in 6 months' time, find me, and we shall seal ourselves together in marriage. Is that a deal?" "Done," she said gently and clearly without the slightest hope that it was true. The sailor nodded once, tried to kiss Nancy's cheek, missed, and headed back towards the Concord. She turned then to seek approval from Brother Timon, but he was gone. One of the things that transformed this character is discovering some books of the Bible that the Cambridge, especially the Cambridge translators, also discovered. They are sometimes referred to nowadays as the Gnostic Gospels. They were referred to then as just apocrypha books of the Bible that had been left out or discounted for various reasons throughout the history of Christianity. And they include the Gospel of Thomas, which is a very important supposedly first-hand account of the words of Jesus. The Gospel of Mary, that is Mary Magdalene wrote a gospel and talked about her relationship with the other disciples and with Peter and with Jesus. And there were 13 books found in 1945, but the Cambridge translators claim to have over 100 secret or discarded Gospels or important related documents that they used in order to create the King James Bible. Before the King James Bible, for example, the Latin Bible did not say, and no other English Bible said, that Jesus told everybody, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." It's an important thing for a religious figure to say, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," especially for the Catholic Church. It was difficult because the Catholic Church's idea at the time was, if you want to get into heaven, talk to me, and I'll be happy to talk to God for you. And that's how you're going to make it, because you don't know how to do it, but I do. And the idea that Jesus told everybody that it was already in them, that they already had the knowledge, that they were already there, And all they had to do is recognize it and realize it is a revolutionary concept. And it's one of the things that caused some trouble in the translation of the King James Bible. And there are plenty of others, including some translation errors that had been discovered. My favorite is, are you familiar with the quote where Jesus says it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven? I loved this when I was 11 or 12 and I was thinking about studying to be a priest. It was the best, it was the most surreal, it was like a Salvador Dali image, you know, a camel going through the eye of a needle. And then we discovered, the Cambridge translator discovered that it's a mistranslation. The word was camelos, not camelos. Camelos means thick rope, camelos means camel. It's only one letter that makes the difference between a thick rope and a camel. Well, it's more likely, according to most of the reports, and they go back to the original Coptic and some Greek texts, and Jesus clearly said it's easier for a thick rope to pass. It's the same concept. You can't get a thick rope through the eye of a needle either. So if you're rich, you're not going to heaven, I'm sorry. It's the exact same thing. It's just a lot less surreal an image. I mean, it's not important. It doesn't change the meaning of the word, but it certainly does change the imagery. And there are thousands of other little translation errors of that sort too, which got a lot of the King James translators into trouble and have been a problem for some people since then. So aside from being an entertaining mystery novel, murder, fun for the entire family, makes the perfect Christmas gift, only $19.95 at your bookstores, only $25.95 at your bookstores. It's also, there's an appendix at the end of the book that talks about the more historical aspect of the book. And I did about 2.5 years of hardcore research, but I actually got interested in this when I was 11 and wanted to be an Episcopal priest and started worrying about this stuff then, and I'm still worried about it now, and I'm 107 years old today. All right, well, I think that concludes my so-called presentation. Are there any questions or comments or criticisms or praise? Especially praise would be good. I think I would have made a good one, but I realized at a certain point, I actually went to seminary for a short time. I realized that I thought I would look good in one of those collars, and I'm not sure that's the best reason to be a priest. Also, they make you take this course, and they should, in your first year of seminary, called Introduction to World Religions or something along those lines. And they say this happens to first-year medical students. You know, it's Introduction to Medicine, and a medical student reads the symptoms of malaria, and they go, I have that. I have malaria. And then they turn the next page, and they read the, you know, polio, and they go, I'm pretty sure I got polio. The same thing happened to me, not that I'm comparing religion to disease, hold on. But the same thing happened to me when I was reading this. You know, I read the chapter on Taoism, and I was absolutely a Taoist. And then I read the chapter on Buddhism, and I was really interested in the Buddha. And then I read the chapter on, you know, and I just got interested in all the religions of the world, all the little children of the world. And, you know, eventually I came back to sort of my own strange version. I mean, if I had a church now, it would be the church of me. And I'm not sure that anybody but me would be interested. So, but thank you for asking. And I can still wear the collar. I can go to a costume shop or something. That's right, exactly. Yes, ma'am?
Do you think the character, whether Simeon, relates to you in any way, or your personal life in any way?
I haven't ever killed anybody. And I think I'm the opposite of him. I can't even memorize my Social Security number. You know, I can't, but that said, most writers say that, of course, there's something of them in every character, because there has to be, because the writer's the one that created the character.
Well, I meant in the, you mentioned in there when she asked, was he some kind of preacher in disguise? Do you think that relates to you in a way?
I am a preacher in disguise. It's a really good disguise. Yeah, I would have to say that I believe theater is a religious experience for me. in a way, and that a lot of the things that I'm trying to do in the theater are things that I would be trying to do if I were involved in the church. I also think that Timon's spiritual journey is not entirely unlike mine. That is, starting one place and going through a lot of research and talking and worrying and praying and worrying and also worrying, getting to another place, yeah. So in that regard, yes. David Henry? I mean, that's an excellent question, and one of the reasons I started writing mysteries in general is to understand plot structure better. I mean, when I was first writing, I started writing poetry first, and then I wrote plays, and the criticism I always had for the fiction that I wrote is that it sounded pretty, but they didn't have a story. There was no story. Didn't have a plot. So the mysteries are the opposite of that. It depends on the plot. And the textbook thing is, yes, figure out who did it, and then write backwards. Generally, my thing is a little bit, I mean, because I have written series, I have a guy who is the main detective or crime solver, and I look at it from his point of view. I mean, it's almost like acting. I become that, or try to become that character and think the way that person would think and try to follow the thread of it. But yes, I always outline very heavily before I start a book, and I know who did it, and yes, several times in some of these other novels, in my earlier mystery series, a novel called Dancing Made Easy, the killer turned out to be the second murder victim who actually hadn't been killed. And so that's somebody you wouldn't expect. Is it a dead guy? So, and I think that's you always try to make it be the least likely person. Having said that, I outline heavily. I know who did it. As I get into it and as I'm writing it, the plot has a character of its own, and it develops itself. And a lot of changes happen during the course of the writing. It never changes who did it and what happened, but a lot of other things change along the way. Tim, you had a question? Why, thank you for asking. Yes, I do. I have a play coming up at Theater in the Square next fall called Chasing Dixie. It's about the great train chase during the Civil War. They asked me to write it, which is always nice. It's always nice to be asked. And I'm working on a sequel to this book, which, this book is coming out in paperage. We just got a paperback deal last week. I forgot to tell you. This book, you can buy it in paperback. It'll be much cheaper. Then it really would make the perfect Christmas gift. And it's what's called a trade paperback, which means it'll be about this size and have a swell cover and everything, as opposed to a mass market paperback, which looks like this, which is smaller, and the cover isn't as nice. So I have a sequel to this one coming out. I have, or in the works, I have a book called The Buried Messiah that I'm about a third of the way through that has to do with the discovery of the Gnostic Gospels in 1945. The actual facts of that discovery are like an Indiana Jones movie. It's incredible. It happened in the desert close to Nag Hammadi, and it has to do with Arab brothers who killed somebody and buried his body parts and discovered a clay pot, and they thought there was a genie in it. This is all true. They thought there was a genie in it, and they were scared to open it. And when they did, all these books came out, and they were extremely disappointed that it wasn't gold. And their mother burned several of them to make tea. And then they turned out to be the Gnostic Gospels, 13 books that had been hidden for 2,000 years. I mean, it's a really cool story, and I'm very excited about that. And then there's, okay, those are the main ones. I've had, I think now the count is 7 movie options. What that means is somebody likes the book and pays you money to option the novel. And the first time it happened, it was the same guys that made the movie Master and Commander, and I was like terrifically excited. And I got the email, I called my agent, and I was like, having a heart attack. This is fantastic. What do we do? What's our next step? And she said, our next step is we wait for a year and a half, and then the deal falls through. That's our next step, so relax. And she was right. None of the options have come to fruition yet, although one of these Flap Tucker books is still under option at HBO. So it could happen. But getting a movie deal these days is almost as hard as getting a book deal. It's really difficult.
Do you write daily?
Yes. I've written something every day since the second day I was 15 years old. I mean, I remember exactly when I started doing it, and I've written every day since then, so that's 40-something years. John? Yeah, that's a great question, and I have heard that quote many times. First, I always have to get straight in my head the difference between writing for theater and writing a novel. And writing for theater, of course, you have to pick the most general, the broadest audience you can possibly think of to write for, Although in the world of theater now, that means people over 65. But anyways, the difference there is this book, I'm hold it up many times because I'm hoping to sell it. This book is a different book every time it gets read, because the reader brings something to the book themselves. So, even though it looks like a single thing, this is actually an aleph. This is a three-dimensional object that can be anywhere at any time, in all places, in all realities, because if you read it, you'll read a different book than if you read it. And so it's as many different books as there are people who read it. That being the case, I don't feel that I write for anybody, because I feel that I'm writing for everybody. Wait. I know that what happens to me when I'm writing is I have the sensation that it's not me writing. I have the sensation that the best thing I can do while I'm writing is to get out of the way and let whatever it is that's doing that, do it. And it's almost a trance state. And I think I'm addicted to it, like you would be addicted to any sort of meditation or anything. I mean, in a good way. Addicted is not the right word, but... yeah, but I don't throw up after I write. Always. Yeah, it's almost a weird transcendental state, And when you're there, the writer and the audience and stuff disappear, and you're sort of in the world of the writing. Kind of. Yes. Would you ask a more concrete question? No? Okay. Yes, Christina.
Okay, it's kind of an odd question, but with a book like that, there's obviously...
With a book like this?
Yeah.
Well,
Or do you?
I don't. But the worst phenomenon for me is I fall in love with the research. I want it all to be in there. It's all fascinating to me. I had almost an entire chapter in this book. This book was about 500 pages longer than it is now. Thanks God for a really good editor. I had a chapter in here about the letter J. The letter J didn't exist in English until sometime after the Battle of Hastings. I don't remember exactly when, but it was brought by the Normans or the Jutes or the Angles or somebody. I'm looking at you guys because I think you know. But anyways, before then it was Y. And there was a huge rush to change Y to J because people thought it sounded more stronger. So I don't want to get into trouble with anybody, but the name originally in the Bible was Yeshua, not Jesus. Jesus is about the 10th translation down the line. and it was with a Y. And sometimes it was Y-S-U-A, and sometimes it was Yeshua, which is Joshua, which is now thought of as Joshua. And then sometimes it was done other ways. But so the original name of that person was Yeshua. And of course the original name of Mary was Miriam, because there's no such name as Mary in Hebrew. It's Miriam. And Joseph's name, I think, was Tubby. So the Holy Family was Yeshua, Miriam, and Tubby. But anyway, so yes, and even my little, all that stuff was in an entire chapter. And of course, the editor's halfway through reading it, and usually they just send you an email or send you a thing. He actually called me on the phone, and he said, "I'm halfway through the chapter about Jay. Are you kidding me?" I said, "But it's so interesting." He said, "Yeah, it's gone." So, but I did put it in the appendix in the back of the book about the J. And it's that way about everything. I was fascinated about this nutmeg thing. I was just, when I discovered that, I wanted to have a whole thing about nutmeg and its uses. And listen, one of the payments to people was a franchise in nutmeg because it was a huge seller. It was used for 3 different things. It cured stomach problems if you put it in food. It caused abortions if you used it in a certain way. And it got you zonked if you did something else with it. So it was an extremely lucrative thing to have a deal to sell nutmeg. Well, I find that fascinating. And yet, so my problem is falling in love with the research and not knowing what to leave out. I want to include it all. Before, this was not a planned question. Yeah, see? I kid you not, last week I got an email from, oh, damn it. It was a university in Dublin, some university in Dublin, asking me if I would do that with this material, asking me if I would put out a scholarly text using the information that I had discarded from this. That's kind of amazing. But of course, yes, I will do that. I want to do that. All that stuff is really interesting to me. So I said right back to them, yes, I would. And I haven't heard back from them, so. Yeah, I know. Brigitte, Dr. Bird? Well, usually I have a sort of self-editing, especially when I'm working on the series. I know what goes in the series and what doesn't. And I've done 3 of the Fever Devlin novels where the editor, and it's the same editor at St. Martin's Press, a guy named Keith Calla. He's been the editor for the last 6 books of mine. And there are 2 of them that he just read and wrote back and said, yeah, it's just some copy editing problems, and that's it. I don't have anything to say. It's great. Send it off. Because I had a process by that time of figuring out what would go in the books and what wouldn't. But this is a completely different thing. And he and I had several major rounds of edits for the book. He just took chapters out that were about the letter J and about nutmeg and stuff. And that was no problem for me because it's more the research. It didn't have anything to do with the plot, and I got that. Here's what happens. You send the manuscript to the editor. The editor reads it and sends you what's called an editorial letter. And that editorial letter is a page to, some people get 200-page editorial letters. The one for this was about 15 pages. And some of it was, I just want to change this little thing, and some of it was, I want you to rethink this entire character. Because, and the editor will explain it to you. And you, of course, can always say, no, I disagree with everything you say, and I want to keep the book the way it is. And you can do that. And the editor will say, okay. And then when it comes time for them to buy your next book, they'll say, okay. So it behooves you to take what the editor says into consideration. But Keith and I know each other now, and we work really well together. It's a very symbiotic relationship. And that's important, I think, to get an editor that you know and that you like and that you can work with. And for me, I he knows what he's doing. He's real smart. He knows how to handle, he knows the kind of readers the book will have and that kind of thing. And I take almost every suggestion that he offers. Then I get a second editorial letter that will say, here are the small things. Then I'll get a third editorial letter from the copy editor saying, here are some just copy editing problems, like, are you sure you want to spell this word this way? Like if it's a young copy editor, they will often say, you said gonna, and it's actually going to. And then you write that person back and say, yes, I know, but the guy says. And then you get a fourth chance to change it, usually with what are called the, well, they're called a lot of different things, but it's essentially you get the book, the way it's laid out, and you have a chance to make changes then too. And that process for this book took almost a year. It usually takes 2 or 3 months. So, and I have much more to say about the editing process, but I just thought I would say that this is one of my Fever Devlin novels, A Minister's Ghost. It's the first book that I wrote that I thought this is actually a novel. It's not just a mystery book. I'm really proud of this one. And this is the paperback version of it. And I just want to read you the quote on the front, and then I'm going to give this away to the person that answers my question correctly. There's a quote on it from Publishers Weekly. It says, DePoy writes with a poet's ear. Now, I know most writers these days write with a computer. DePoy writes with a poet's ear. I looked at that for 10 minutes before I realized what they were saying. There's a lot of poetry in this book, and I will give this book away to the person who can remember the name that Brother Timon was before he became Brother Timon.
I know. Oh, I raised my hand.
This is a life lesson. You were polite. Who just yelled it out? John Schiffer just yelled it out. And he's going to get it. So let that be a lesson to you, young lady. Could you pass it back to him, please? Anyway, thank you very much. Are there any other concluding things? That's good. Okay, good. Thank you.